The first thing I noticed wasn't my daughter. It was my own hands. They were folded in my lap, rough and scarred from 30 years of lifting boxes, scrubbing floors, fixing broken pipes, and doing whatever work put food on the table. I had spent an extra $70 getting them cleaned up as best I could before the wedding. The man at the barber shop even laughed and said, "Jack, those hands have seen some life." They had, just not the kind anyone celebrates at weddings. The music started. Everyone stood. I looked toward the chapel doors inside the old stone church outside Bozeman, Montana, expecting, hoping, if I'm honest, to hear my name at the last second. Instead, the wedding coordinator smiled at Richard Dawson. Emily slipped her arm through his, and together they began walking down the aisle. People smiled. Someone whispered behind me, "That's her father." I almost turned around to correct him. Instead, I clapped, just like everybody else. My name is Jack Sullivan. I'm 67 years old, and for 30 years I raised my two daughters by myself after their mother walked away. I never became wealthy. I never owned a lake house or drove a luxury SUV. I drove a 12-year-old Ford F-15. Oh, that rattled every time I hit 60 miles an hour. But my girls never missed a meal. They never wore shoes with holes. They never had to quit a school activity because Dad couldn't afford it. I made sure of that. When Linda left, Emily was 4. Rachel had just turned 2. One Friday evening, she packed 2 suitcases while I was at my shift, unloading trailers for UPS. When I came home, the girls were asleep on the couch. Linda wasn't. There was a note taped to the coffee maker. "I can't live like this anymore." That was it. No argument, no warning. 3 weeks later, I learned she'd moved to Denver with a businessman she'd met through work. I was angry for about a month. After that, I didn't have time to stay angry. There were lunches to pack, hair to braid, doctor appointments, homework, nightmares, laundry. Life has a way of pushing grief aside when 2 little girls depend on you. Every weekday started at 4:15 in the morning. Coffee, toast, wake Emily, wake Rachel. Drop them at Mrs. Carter's house before sunrise. Clock in at the UPS warehouse by 6. Unload trucks until 2. Drive across town. Grab a burger from Wendy's if I was lucky. Then change into my janitor uniform at Lincoln Elementary. From 4 until nearly 10 at night, I emptied trash cans, scrubbed cafeteria floors, cleaned bathrooms, and fixed broken desks. The school always smelled like bleach and crayons. By the time I picked the girls up, they were usually asleep in Mrs. Carter's spare bedroom. I'd carry one under each arm into our little house. Some nights, I'd sit on the edge of my bed with my work boots still on because I was too tired to untie them. Looking back, I honestly don't know how I did it. I just know I never considered another option. The girls were worth every aching muscle. For years, that's all that mattered. Then elementary school happened. One afternoon, I stopped by Lincoln Elementary during my evening shift because Emily had forgotten her lunchbox. I was still wearing my Navy custodian shirt with my name stitched over the pocket. A mop leaned against the hallway behind me. Emily saw me before I reached her classroom. For just a second, her face lit up. Then 2 girls from her class walked over. "Who's that?" one asked. Emily froze. I watched panic spread across her little face. She looked at me, then back at them. "Oh," she forced a smile. That's just the janitor." The words landed harder than any box I'd ever dropped at the warehouse. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was 8 years old. Children notice things adults wish they didn't. I simply nodded. "Hey, sweetheart." I handed her the lunchbox. "You forgot this." She whispered, "Thanks." Wouldn't look me in the eye. I smiled anyway. "See you at home." That night, she climbed into my lap while we watched Wheel of Fortune. "I'm sorry, Dad." "For what?" She buried her face against my chest. "I love you." I kissed the top of her head. "I love you too, Peanut." And I convinced myself that was enough. The older the girls got, the better they became at pretending everything was fine. Looking back now, I don't think either of them hated where I worked. They hated what they thought it said about them. That's a hard sentence for a father to admit. But it's true. Middle school is cruel. Kids notice whose parents wear suits and whose parents wear steel-toe boots. They notice who gets dropped off in a new Tahoe and who climbs out of a pickup with rust around the wheel wells. Emily noticed. Rachel noticed too. Neither one ever said it outright. Instead, it showed up in little moments. Dad, can you park around the corner? Dad, could you wait until everyone leaves before picking me up? Dad, don't wear your work shirt if you're coming to the concert. Every request sounded small, reasonable even, and every time I told myself the same thing. They're teenagers. This will pass. One Friday afternoon, I surprised Rachel at her middle school. She'd forgotten the poster board for her science project. I'd driven 20 minutes during my lunch break to bring it over. When I walked into the front office, the secretary smiled. You're a good dad, Jack. I try. Rachel came jogging down the hallway. The second she saw my UPS uniform, she slowed down. A group of boys stood near the drinking fountain. She grabbed the poster board quickly. Thanks, I leaned in. Need help carrying it? No, I'm okay. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. One of the boys called out, Hey, is that your grandpa? The others laughed. Rachel didn't answer. She simply hurried away. I stood there holding the office door open long after she'd disappeared around the corner. The secretary looked at me with sad eyes. Kids can be awful. I shrugged. They're just trying to fit in. But the drive back to work felt longer than usual. That evening, Rachel came into the garage while I was changing the oil in my truck. She stood there quietly. I'm sorry. I looked up. For what? For today? I wiped my hands on an old towel. You don't have to apologize. She started crying. I just don't want people making fun of you. I smiled. They're making fun of me. She shook her head. They're making fun of us. That was the first time I understood. My daughters weren't ashamed because I was a janitor. They were ashamed because they believed other people thought less of them for having a father like me. And somehow, that hurt even more. Still, every Father's Day, every birthday, every Christmas, they wrote the sweetest cards. You're the best dad ever. Love you forever. Couldn't ask for a better father. I kept every single one inside an old cedar cigar box that had belonged to my own dad. Whenever doubt crept in, I'd pull out those cards and read them. Those words became stronger than everything I saw with my own eyes. People believe what they desperately want to believe. I wasn't any different. Years passed. Emily earned a scholarship to Montana State. Rachel followed 3 years later. Watching them graduate remains one of the proudest days of my life. Not because they wore caps and gowns, because they'd escaped the life I had. That's all I'd ever wanted. I remember standing in the parking lot after Emily's graduation. She hugged me so hard my glasses nearly fell off. You did it, Dad, I laughed. No, sweetheart, you did. She looked at my hands, the same scarred hands that had embarrassed her years earlier. She held them for a second, then quickly let go as some classmates walked toward us. I noticed, pretended I didn't. About a year later, Linda called. It had been almost 25 years. I almost didn't recognize her voice. Jack, she sounded older, quieter. I've been thinking about the girls. I leaned back in my kitchen chair. So have I. She laughed awkwardly. I'd like to see them. I wanted to say no. God knows I had enough reasons. Instead, I said something that surprised even me. They're adults now. If they want to see you, that's their choice. Emily called me the following weekend. Dad, Mom reached out. I know. There was a long silence. I think I should meet her. You don't need my permission. Aren't you mad? I stared out the window at the bird feeder I'd built with Rachel years before. No. Another pause. I just hope she doesn't disappoint you again. Emily's voice cracked. I still love you the most. I smiled into the phone. I know you do. I truly believed it. What I didn't understand was that love and shame can exist in the same heart, and sometimes shame speaks louder. Linda didn't waste any time. Within a month of reconnecting with the girls, she invited them to Denver for a weekend. Richard was there too. He owned a commercial real estate company, wore tailored jackets, even to dinner, and somehow knew everyone at every restaurant we walked into. The hostess greeted him by name. The valet shook his hand. The waiter brought his usual bottle of wine without asking. It was a different world. Emily called me that Sunday evening. Dad Richard introduced me to someone. Oh, a marketing director in Dallas. That's wonderful. He thinks he can help me get an interview. I smiled. Then you'd better send him a thank you note. She laughed. You always know the right thing to say. Truth was, I meant it. If someone wanted to help my daughter build a better future, why would I stand in the way over the next few years? Richard opened doors I never could have. Emily landed a job with a national healthcare company in Dallas. Rachel was introduced to the superintendent of a growing school district outside Fort Collins and found a teaching position almost immediately after graduation. Neither opportunity came from favoritism. They still earned those jobs. Richard simply got their resumes onto the right desks. I couldn't do that. I didn't have those kinds of friends. And honestly, I was grateful someone could. The girls started flying to Denver more often. Christmases became complicated. Some years they'd spend Thanksgiving with me and Christmas with Linda. Other years it was the other way around. Life changes. Families change. That's what I kept telling myself. Richard was always polite. He never tried to replace me, never called himself their father, never told them not to visit me. In fact, every time we met, he'd shake my hand and say, "Jack, good to see you." I never disliked the man. That would have been easier. The harder truth was this. Richard wasn't taking my place. My daughters were giving it to him, little by little, without realizing what they were doing. One spring afternoon, Emily invited me to a charity gala in Dallas. "I'd love for you to come." I almost said no. Those events weren't really my world, but she sounded excited. So I bought a new sport coat at Kohl's and flew down for the weekend. The ballroom looked like something out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers, women in evening gowns, men discussing investments I'd never heard of. Emily looked beautiful, confident, successful. I couldn't have been prouder, for a while. Then I noticed something. Every person she introduced me to heard the same sentence. "This is Jack," not, "This is my dad." Just Jack. The first time I thought nothing of it. The second time I wondered. By the sixth introduction, I knew. Richard arrived about 20 minutes later. Emily practically glowed. "There he is." She hurried across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is my stepdad, Richard Dawson." People smiled, asked him questions, shook his hand. Several congratulated him on raising such an impressive young woman. Richard glanced toward me. I could tell he was uncomfortable. He started to correct them once. Emily interrupted before he could. The conversation moved on. That night back in my hotel room, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror brushing my teeth. I caught my own reflection. Gray hair, wrinkles around my eyes, a face weathered by sun and work. Then I heard Emily's words echoing in my mind. "This is Jack." Not because she didn't know who I was, because introducing me as her father made her feel exposed. I slept maybe 3 hours. The next morning she hugged me goodbye at Love Field Airport. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too." She kissed my cheek. I watched her walk away. For a brief second, I almost asked the question that had been sitting in my chest for years. "Are you embarrassed by me?" Instead, I smiled, because fathers get very good at protecting their children, even from questions they deserve to answer. A year later, Emily called. "Dad." Her voice sounded happier than I'd ever heard it. "Ben proposed." I laughed so loudly the cashier at Ace Hardware turned around. "Well, don't keep the poor guy waiting." She laughed. I said yes. I figured. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "Richard's helping us plan the wedding." I smiled. That's nice. But somewhere deep inside me, something quietly began preparing for the disappointment my heart already saw coming. The wedding was in late September. Bozeman had already started turning gold. The cottonwoods along the Gallatin River looked like somebody had brushed them with yellow paint, and the morning air carried that sharp little bite that tells you summer is over. I drove to the church an hour early, not because I had to, because I wanted a few extra minutes to collect myself. I'd spent almost 3 months getting ready for that day. Not emotionally, financially. I bought a navy sport coat from Men's Warehouse during a Labor Day sale. The salesman convinced me to spend another $40 having the sleeves adjusted. Weddings are forever in pictures, he said. You'll be glad you did. I even bought a new pair of brown loafers. They weren't expensive, but they were the nicest shoes I'd ever owned. When I looked in the mirror that morning, I thought, Emily won't have to feel embarrassed today. Funny the bargains we make with ourselves. Guests began arriving. Ben's parents came over and introduced themselves. Warm people. His mother squeezed my arm. You must be so proud. I sure am. I've heard wonderful things about your daughters. I smiled. I've heard wonderful things about your son. For a while, everything felt normal. Then the wedding coordinator walked over. Mr. Sullivan. Yes. She smiled politely. Emily asked if Richard could wait with the bridal party before the ceremony. I nodded. Of course. There wasn't anything strange about that. He was family too. A few minutes later, I saw Richard standing outside the bridal suite in a tuxedo. He looked nervous. He caught my eye, started walking toward me. Jack, he rubbed the back of his neck. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. What do you mean? I asked Emily twice if she was sure. My stomach tightened. Richard looked almost uncomfortable saying the next sentence. She wants me to walk her down the aisle. For a moment, the hallway became completely silent. Not because nobody was talking, because my mind stopped hearing anything. Richard kept speaking. I told her maybe both of us could walk with her. She said no. I swallowed. Why? He hesitated, then quietly answered. She said it would fit the wedding better. He looked ashamed just repeating the words. I'm sorry. I managed a smile. It's okay. But it wasn't. Not really. Richard reached into his pocket. I don't feel right about this. You don't have to do it. He sighed. If I refuse, I'll make today about me. He wasn't wrong. Neither of us wanted that. I put a hand on his shoulder. Go take care of my little girl. He stared at me for a second. I don't think I'm the one who's been taking care of her. Then he walked away. That sentence stayed with me long after the wedding ended. The ceremony was beautiful. Ben couldn't stop smiling. Emily looked radiant. She really did. When the doors opened and Richard offered his arm, she beamed with pride. The guests turned to watch. So did I. There wasn't anger in my heart, only something much heavier. Acceptance. For years I'd convinced myself that every awkward introduction, every request to park around the corner, every moment she avoided calling me Dad in front of certain people, those were just phases, children trying to survive. But watching another man walk beside her toward the altar finally stripped away every excuse I'd ever made. She hadn't made that decision in one afternoon. She'd been walking away from me in tiny steps for 25 years. This was simply the last one. The reception lasted until nearly 10. I danced once with Rachel. She hugged me tightly afterward. I love you, Dad. I know. Emily thanked everyone for coming. She kissed my cheek before she and Ben left. Drive safe. I will. No tears, no speeches, no confrontation. I drove home alone beneath a sky full of stars. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't go inside. I sat in my truck for almost 2 hours with the engine off. I thought about every decision I'd made since Linda left, every overtime shift, every birthday I'd missed because somebody needed an extra pair of hands at work, every lie I'd believed because it was easier than facing the truth. The girls did love me. I never doubted that. But love wasn't stronger than shame, and for 30 years, I'd mistaken one for the other. Just before midnight, I walked into my empty house. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about how to be a better father. I was wondering whether I remembered how to be Jack Sullivan. The next morning, I made coffee out of habit, 2 mugs, just like I had for years. One for me, one that nobody would ever drink. I laughed at myself, poured the second cup down the sink, and stood there watching the steam disappear. That was when it finally hit me. For 30 years, every decision I'd made started with the same question. What do the girls need? Not once had I asked, what do I want? The answer was simple. I had no idea. Over the next few weeks, I tried living exactly as I always had. Morning walks, grocery shopping at Albertsons, church on Sundays, coffee with Earl, an old friend from UPS, every Thursday morning at the same diner we'd been meeting at since retirement. Everything looked the same. Nothing felt the same. One Thursday, Earl stirred his coffee without looking at me. "You've been quieter." "I've been thinking." "Dangerous hobby," I smiled. "You ever wake up and realize you've forgotten who you are?" He looked up. "Took me 2 years after retirement." "I don't mean work. I mean," I searched for the words. "I spent so long being somebody's father that I never learned how to just be me." Earl nodded slowly. "My wife said something after I retired. 'What? Bill, you spent 40 years making a living. Now you need to learn how to make a life.'" That sentence stayed with me all week. A few days later, I drove past the house where the girls had grown up. The swing I'd hung from the maple tree was still there. The paint on the porch needed work. The fence leaned a little. Every corner carried a memory. Rachel learning to ride her bike. Emily practicing free throws in the driveway. Christmas lights we'd never quite managed to hang straight. It suddenly occurred to me that I was living inside a museum. Everything around me belonged to people who no longer live there, including me. That afternoon, I called a realtor. 2 months later, the house sold. I didn't tell the girls, not because I wanted to punish them, because I knew exactly what they'd say. "Dad, you should have told us." And then life would go back to normal. Phone calls every few weeks, birthday dinners, Christmas visits, everyone pretending nothing had changed. No, something had changed. It was me. I bought a small apartment in a retirement community outside Missoula. Quiet place, walking trails, a fishing pond, more pickup trucks than luxury cars. Nobody cared what you'd done for a living, only whether you wanted to join them for coffee. One afternoon, I noticed a flyer on the community bulletin board. Men needed. Volunteer mentors for boys growing up without fathers. Saturday mornings. Basic life skills. No experience required. I laughed. No experience. I folded the flyer into my pocket. 30 years of fatherhood was about the only experience I had. The first Saturday, 6 boys showed up. The youngest was 9, the oldest maybe 16. Some had fathers in prison, some had never met theirs. One had lost his dad to an overdose. They were shy, restless, trying hard not to care. I recognized that look immediately. We spent the morning changing the tire on an old Chevy pickup. Nobody talked much. The following week, we learned how to unclog a sink. The week after that, how to tie a necktie. One skinny kid named Mason frowned at the mirror for almost 10 minutes. "I can't get it." I stepped behind him. "Watch my hands." He watched carefully. Tried again. This time, the knot landed perfectly. His whole face lit up. "I did it." "You sure did." Then he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mr. Jack?" "Yeah." "My mom says real men don't cry." I chuckled. "Your mom ever watch football?" He laughed. "Sure." "You ever seen those big old linemen crying after winning the Super Bowl?" He nodded. "Real men cry. They just try not to quit." He thought about that, then quietly said, "I wish somebody had told me that before." By Christmas, there were almost 20 boys coming every Saturday. Some days we'd replace faucet washers. Other days we'd grill hamburgers. Sometimes we'd just sit around talking about jobs, girlfriends, bills, and how to apologize when you mess something up. Every meeting ended the same way. I'd tell them, "Be good to people." Then I'd pause. A lesson I'd learned far too late. "And don't forget to build a life for yourself too." The funny thing was, I wasn't only teaching those boys, I was finally teaching myself. Meanwhile, back in Bozeman, my daughters were about to discover that for the first time in 30 years, they had no idea where to find their father. 3 months passed before either of my daughters realized something was different. Not because I was hiding, because I'd spent years making sure I never became a burden. I still answered every phone call. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, sweetheart." "How are you?" "Oh, I'm doing just fine." "You eating okay?" "Too well." A little laugh, a few minutes of small talk. Then one of them would say they had to run. A meeting, a soccer game, dinner with friends. I'd tell them to enjoy themselves. Then we'd hang up. Nobody noticed the conversations had become shorter. Nobody asked why I never called first anymore. For the first time in 30 years, I let them come to me. It was Rachel who noticed first. She called Emily one Tuesday evening. "Have you talked to Dad lately?" "Last week, I think." "He sounds different." Emily shrugged. "He's getting older." "No." Rachel paused. "It's like he doesn't need us anymore." Emily laughed. "Since when has Dad ever needed anybody?" Rachel couldn't answer that. Because the truth was, I never had. At least I'd never let them see it. The following Saturday, Emily called. "Dad, Ben, and I were thinking about driving up next weekend." "I'd like that." "You'll be home." There was the slightest pause before I answered. "No." "Oh." Another pause. "So, where are you?" "Out with friends." Emily smiled. "Friends. Turns out retirement communities have more social calendars than high schools." She laughed. "I didn't know you had a retirement community." "I do now." She frowned. "What do you mean? I'll tell you about it sometime." Before she could ask another question, I gently changed the subject. "How's Ben?" By the time we hung up, she'd forgotten to ask. A week later, they decided to surprise me. Emily drove from Billings. Rachel came up from Cody. They met in front of my old house around lunchtime. Only, it wasn't my house anymore. A young couple was unloading boxes from a moving truck. Emily knocked on the door. "Hi," the woman smiled. "Can I help you?" "We're looking for Jack Sullivan." "Oh, you must be his daughters." Emily blinked. "How did you know?" "He talked about you when we bought the place." Rachel stepped forward. "Bought?" The woman nodded. "We closed almost 3 months ago." Emily's face went pale. 3 months? Yes. He said he was excited about starting over somewhere quieter. Starting over. Rachel repeated those words under her breath, as if she'd never imagined her father might want such a thing. Emily pulled out her phone immediately, straight to voicemail. She called again. Nothing. Rachel tried. Nothing. For the first time since they were little girls, panic settled into both of their voices. They drove across town to Mrs. Carter's house. She was in her 80s now, still living in the same little blue home where she'd watched them after school all those years. She opened the door with a walker. "My goodness," she smiled. "The Sullivan girls." Emily hugged her. "We're trying to find Dad." Mrs. Carter looked surprised. "You don't know where he is?" Rachel shook her head. "No." The old woman studied their faces for a long moment, then quietly said, "I wondered when you'd come." Emily's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Carter motioned them inside. On the coffee table sat a framed photograph. It was me, standing beside a group of teenage boys holding fishing poles. All of us were grinning. "Jack sends me a Christmas card every year," she said. "He looks happy." Emily stared at the picture. "I've never seen this." "No." Mrs. Carter smiled gently. "Because that picture wasn't taken for you girls." Silence filled the room. Then the old woman said something neither sister had expected. "Your father finally found people who ask how he's doing, before asking what he's doing." Neither of them spoke. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, she woke to severe stomach pain. She was 12 weeks pregnant. Ben was working an overnight emergency shift at the hospital. For one terrifying moment, she thought something was wrong with the baby. Without thinking, she grabbed her phone. Her thumb found one name automatically. Dad. She pressed it. Voicemail. She stared at the screen. Then she realized something that made her cry harder than the pain itself. All her life, whenever something went wrong, she'd called the same man, not because he had money, not because he had answers, because somehow he always made everything feel less frightening. For the first time in her life, she didn't know where that man was, and no amount of success, connections, or wealth could tell her how to get back to him. Emily called again the next morning, still voicemail. She left a message this time. "Dad, it's me. Call me when you can, okay?" She tried to sound casual. She didn't fool herself. By lunchtime, she checked her phone 11 times. Rachel wasn't doing any better. She had spent half the morning calling old neighbors, former church members, and Dad's retired friends from UPS. Nobody gave her an address, not because they were hiding him, because they honestly didn't know. He said he was heading west. I think he mentioned a retirement community. Somewhere outside Missoula, maybe. Every conversation ended the same way. I'm sorry. On Monday afternoon, Rachel drove back to Bozeman Community Church. Pastor Mike had baptized both sisters years ago. He smiled when he saw them. Well, this is a surprise. We're looking for Dad. The smile faded. I figured. Rachel frowned. You figured. Pastor Mike motioned toward his office. After everyone sat down, he opened a desk drawer. I wasn't sure whether to give you these. He placed 3 envelopes on the table. Each one had a different name. Emily. Rachel. Pastor Mike. They're not letters, he explained. They're thank you notes. Emily looked confused. For what? For listening. Rachel exchanged a glance with her sister. Pastor Mike leaned back in his chair. The week before your father moved away, he came by my office. He stayed almost 2 hours. What did he say? Emily whispered. He said something I've never forgotten. Pastor Mike's voice softened. Mike, I think I finally understand my girls. He wasn't angry. He wasn't blaming either of you. He simply said, children spend their whole lives trying to build a future. Parents spend theirs trying to protect it. Maybe I've been standing too close. Emily lowered her eyes. Pastor Mike continued. Then he smiled and said, it's time they stop worrying about taking care of me. And it's time I stop making fatherhood my entire identity. The room fell silent. Rachel quietly wiped away a tear. Did he say anything else? Pastor Mike nodded. He asked me to pray for you. Emily looked up. For us? Yes. He said, don't pray that they miss me. Pray they never spend 30 years forgetting themselves the way I did. The search stretched into another week. Emily used vacation days. Rachel missed 2 faculty meetings. They drove nearly 400 miles, following one lead after another. One morning they stopped at an old UPS terminal where Dad had worked for almost 3 decades. Most of the faces were new, but one gray-haired dispatcher recognized the family name. Jack Sullivan. He smiled immediately. Best man I ever worked with. Emily's chest tightened. We're trying to find him. The dispatcher laughed. You girls finally chasing him down. What do you mean? He talked about retiring somewhere peaceful for years. He always said, I've spent enough time living by the clock. Emily smiled sadly. That sounds like him. The old dispatcher opened his wallet. Inside was a faded photograph. Dad stood beside 3 younger warehouse workers holding burgers after a charity softball game. The men were laughing so hard that one of them had ketchup on his shirt. I keep this because your dad taught me something. What? He covered my shift for 6 weeks when my wife had cancer. Emily blinked. He never told us that. He wouldn't. He made me promise not to. The dispatcher slid the photograph back into his wallet. That's just who Jack was. The breakthrough came from someone neither sister expected. Richard. He called Emily late Thursday evening. I think I found him. Emily almost dropped the phone. What? I remembered something from the wedding. What? When your father and I spoke before the ceremony, Richard paused. He mentioned always wanting to see Glacier National Park after retirement. Emily frowned. So, I started calling retirement communities between Bozeman and Glacier. You did that? I owed him at least that much. Emily closed her eyes. For the first time since the wedding, she heard genuine guilt in Richard's voice. I shouldn't have walked you down that aisle. Emily whispered, I asked you to. I know. I still should have said no. There was a long silence. Then Richard said something that broke whatever was left of Emily's pride. I had money. I had connections. But Emily, I never earned the place your father spent 30 years building. She started crying. I know. No. He answered quietly. I don't think you did. Not until now. The next morning, the 3 of them climbed into Richard's SUV and headed toward western Montana. None of them knew exactly what they would say if they found me. They only knew one thing. This wasn't a trip to bring me home. It was a journey to find the man they had never truly seen. I was teaching a 14-year-old named Mason how to replace the float valve inside an old toilet tank when I noticed three people standing near the entrance. Emily, Rachel, Richard. For a second, I wondered if I was imagining them. Mason followed my eyes. "You know them, Mr. Jack," I smiled. "I sure do." "They're my family," he grinned. "Then you better go say hi." I handed him the wrench. "You finish tightening that nut. Don't overdo it." He laughed. "I got it." "I know you do." That made me smile. 6 months earlier, he would have asked me to do it for him. Now he trusted his own hands. Maybe that was the whole point. The community center buzzed with conversation. About 40 boys and young men were there that Saturday. Some were sanding wooden shelves. Others were learning how to patch drywall. A few older volunteers were helping a group change the brake pads on a donated pickup truck. Nobody wore expensive clothes. Nobody cared. Around here, respect came from showing up, not showing off. Emily walked toward me slowly. Her eyes were already red. She stopped a few feet away. "You look—" She couldn't finish the sentence. I laughed softly. "Older." She shook her head. "Happy." I looked around the room. Mason had already started helping another boy without being asked. 2 teenagers were arguing about whether a wrench should be left loose or hand tight. One of them looked over. "Mr. Jack." "What? Who's right?" I pointed at the taller kid. "He's right." The other one groaned. "I knew it." Everyone laughed. I turned back to my daughters. "This is my Saturday." Rachel looked around in amazement. "They all know you." "I know them too." Just then the program director tapped a microphone. "Folks, before lunch, we've got one more thing." I frowned. "What are you doing, Karen?" She smiled. "You'll see." She motioned me toward the front. "I don't like surprises." "That's exactly why we're doing this." The room laughed. Karen looked out at the boys. "When Mr. Jack came here 6 months ago, he said he wasn't sure anybody needed him anymore." Emily lowered her head. Karen continued, "I think these young men have a different opinion." One by one, the boys stood up. Mason went first. "When my dad left, I thought being a man meant pretending nothing hurt." He looked at me. "Mr. Jack taught me real men tell the truth, especially when it's hard." Then another boy stood. "He taught me how to tie a tie before my first job interview." Another. "He fixed my bike with me instead of fixing it for me." Another. "He came to my baseball game even though my own family didn't." A 17-year-old named Caleb swallowed hard before speaking. "I used to think nobody would ever be proud of me." He smiled. Then Mr. Jack hung my welding certificate on the wall before I even got home. The room grew quiet. I looked down. Because if I looked at those boys any longer, I'd lose it. Karen stepped beside me. "You told us you weren't sure who you were after your daughters grew up." She smiled warmly. "I think you've answered your own question." The entire room stood, not because someone asked them to, because they wanted to. The applause seemed to go on forever. When it finally settled, Emily walked onto the little stage. She didn't ask for the microphone. She simply stood in front of me. "I'm sorry." No excuses, no explanations, just those 2 words. Tears rolled down her face. "I spent my whole life believing successful people would make me feel safe." She glanced at Richard. "Richard gave me opportunities." Then she looked back at me. "But you," her voice broke, "you were the one who never made me wonder whether I was loved." Rachel stepped beside her. "I thought we'd always have more time." I smiled gently. "So did I." Emily wiped her eyes. "I keep thinking about my wedding." "I know. I wish I could change it." I placed my hand over hers. "No." She looked confused. "You can't." "Neither can I. Life doesn't give receipts. It gives lessons." Richard stepped forward. "I owe you an apology too." "You don't owe me anything. I accepted something that wasn't mine." I shook my head. "No." I smiled at him. "The honor wasn't stolen. It was given." Emily closed her eyes. The truth hurt because it was true. That afternoon, we ate hamburgers with the boys. Nobody talked about the wedding anymore. Instead, Mason challenged Rachel to a game of horseshoes. Emily laughed harder than I'd heard in years after Caleb accidentally dropped an entire tray of potato salad. For the first time, they weren't trying to fit into somebody else's world. They were simply sitting in mine. Before they left, Emily hugged me. Not the quick, careful hugs we'd exchanged for years. The kind a little girl gives her father after scraping her knee. "Dad, yeah, would you come visit your grandchild when they're born?" I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. People sometimes ask me if leaving was my revenge. It wasn't. The real revenge was discovering that my life still had purpose after I stopped chasing approval from the people I loved most. Ironically, the moment I stopped making myself the center of my children's lives was the moment they finally saw the father who had been there all along. If this story reminded you of someone who's quietly loved you through the years, don't wait for the perfect moment to tell them. Ordinary days have a way of becoming our last chance before we know it.